Using quotation marks in direct and indirect quotations. Quotation marks are used to show a speaker's exact words. When you use a speaker's exact words, it is called a direct quotation. Use quotation marks at the beginning and end of a direct quotation. Use a comma to set off explanatory words, which are called the attribution. Steve said, "The baseball game starts at 1 o'clock. Steve said are the explanatory words, or the attribution. The comma is outside the quotation marks. The baseball game starts at 1 o'clock. The explanatory words, Steve said, are at the end this time, so the comma goes inside the quotation marks. If the quotation is divided into two parts by explanatory words, both parts have to have quotation marks. Do not capitalize the first word of the second part if it is part of one sentence that is continued. But do capitalize if it is a new sentence. Let's look at a couple examples of that. "I checked the schedule," said Leo, "and we have time to eat." Said Leo are explanatory words. So there's a comma after schedule and a comma after Leo, and then no capital on and. The sentence ends after eat. "That's good," said Ricky. "We'll be hungry." Said Ricky are explanatory words. But the first sentence ends after said Ricky. The second sentence starts new, so we use a capital W, and the second sentence ends after hungry. Look at these examples to see where there should and should not be spaces. Steve said the baseball game starts at 1 o'clock. There's no space between said and the comma, and there's no space between the quotation mark and the next word, which is the, but there is a space between the comma and the quotation mark. At the end, there's no space between clock and period, and no space between period and the quotation mark. "I checked the schedule," said Leo, "and we have time to eat." There's no space between the first quotation mark and the word I, and there's no space after schedule before the comma, and no space between the comma and the quotation mark. But there is a space between the quotation mark and the said. Then there's no space between Leo and the comma, and in the next quotation part, there's no space between the quotation mark and, but there is a space between the comma and the quotation mark. At the end, it's the same as in the last sentence, there's no space after eat before the period, and there's no space after the period before the quotation mark. An indirect quotation is when the speaker's words are restated in somewhat different words. Quotation marks are not needed because it's not a direct quote. A direct quote would be, "Mr. Brown said, 'Be ready, the bus is leaving at 8. Those are his exact words, "Be ready, the bus is leaving at 8. An indirect quote would be, "Mr. Brown said for us to be ready because the bus is leaving at 8. You can tell that Mr. Brown isn't saying that, somebody else is repeating what Mr. Brown said. So that's called an indirect quote, and you don't need quotation marks for that. Now it is your turn. Show what you learned by completing the Google form.